I hereby call to order this meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee on February 28, 2024 at 7 p.m. I am Linda Lukowski, Chair of the School Committee, and I want to welcome everyone here tonight. A reminder that this meeting is being audio and video recorded. I'm going to read our vision statement. We are a community of learners known for our unwavering commitment to meeting the needs of all students. Through the adoption of best practices and our active partnership with families and the wider community who are united in supporting the development of engaged, successful, responsible, resilient learners. Students will be well prepared to be ethical, empathetic, and contributing citizens. Can we please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Next is oral communication from the public. Members of the public may address the committee for up to 3 minutes, longer with the permission of the chairperson. The committee will not engage in a discussion on topics raised during public comment, but may choose to add the topic to future agenda. This agenda segment will be limited to 15 minutes. Are there any members of the public who wish to address the committee? Seeing none. The next item is the Statement of Interest submission. As you all know, the district has submitted statements of interest to the Mass School Building Authority's core program for the Byfield campus the last 2 years, asking for assistance with a construction project here. Both years, our application made it to the final round where engineers would come out on site and inspect the facilities, but the application was not accepted into those rounds. The MSBA has limited funds for partnership, which has restricted the number of applications accepted each year to just a small fraction of the total applications. The committee has already discussed applying again this year, and the superintendent will discuss the application he has prepared. I know, I almost choked on it.
I think it was better without it. So, good choice. So this statement of interest, there are tweaks. So this is, again, as the chair said, this is the third time. You have the redrafted statement of interest for the middle school, for the high school with this year's date. There is a little more information in there, teased out a little more. The fact that we do have $1.6 million set aside in stabilization to address a feasibility study. That wasn't necessarily the case in prior submissions. So there are some tweaks in the overall narrative, largely in the first sections. The bulk, where it goes through in extensive details the challenges and struggles of the facility itself, that remains unchanged. So just as a reminder, we have to apply twice. These are two, even though this is a single campus of 286,000 square feet, there, you hear about LEAs, it's a local education agency. So each school is a local LEA. The district is an LEA, each school code. So they are coded as separate schools, separate administrations, separate entities. So they cannot be on the same application. So you'll see here that the high school is designated as the priority statement of interest. The middle school is the secondary. Obviously, we've shared with them in the documentation as well as through the site visits that there isn't a path here where we would be renovating just the high school. It is the campus we'd be looking at for a renovation project. It's, again, to remind, we've had that conversation several times now. It asks for the statement of interest if the anticipation is an addition, a renovation addition, or new building. So obviously we have to study everything, but they ask you to prioritize what we are thinking. We're listing this as a renovation, a major renovation, obviously. But you have the documentation there with the vote tonight. I will be submitting it on Friday morning, so the date in the motion, and yes, you have to read two separate motions, word for word, and then Linda will sign a letter by Friday morning that we submit saying that you took that vote word for word to submit those two applications. Last thing I'll say is, so the facility subcommittee, we now have membership from all 3 towns. Scheduled meeting for the 15th, which is 2 weeks from this Friday. Part of that discussion and part of the purpose of establishing that committee is not to say we're not going to do a statement of interest, but the inevitable what if, right? The reality is if we are accepted in December of 24, the clock starts. You actually aren't welcomed in until the spring, so we could do it as early as March of 25. That's starting a 5 to 7 year clock. We are fairly certain there are portions of this building that are not going to make it another 6 to 8 years, potentially longer. So just to note that, yes, we're submitting the statement, but also a topic of discussion of that facility subcommittee is to talk about the Plan B, because we have to have a viable Plan B for any portion of the building that wouldn't wait. So there you have it. Happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Does anybody have any questions?
Not about the statement of interest themselves, but last year around this time, we communicated with our representatives and state senator. Is this the appropriate time to be doing that again?
So after we submit, we ask them to submit a letter of support. So last year it was a joint letter, right? It wasn't three separate, by Representative Shand, Kastner, and Senator Tarr, all signed, pretty sure, a single letter of support. So yes, we would be reaching out to them to get that support again.
Okay, can I have a motion?
I'll make a motion that, having convened in an open meeting on February 28, 2024, prior to the SOI submission closing date, the school committee of the Triton Regional School District, in accordance with its charter, bylaws, and ordinances, has voted to authorize the superintendent to submit to the Massachusetts School Building Authority the statement of interest form dated March 1st, 2024, for the Triton Regional High School, located at 112 Elm Street, Byfield, Massachusetts, which describes and explains the following deficiencies and the priority categories for which an application may be submitted to the Massachusetts School Building Authority in the and the priority categories for which an application may be submitted to the Massachusetts School Building Authority in the future. 5, replacement, renovation, or modernization of school facility systems such as roofs, windows, boilers, heating and ventilation systems to increase energy conservation and decrease energy-related costs. And 7, replacement of or addition to obsolete buildings in order to provide for a full range of programs consistent with state and approved local requirements. And hereby further specifically acknowledges that by submitting the statement of interest form, the Massachusetts School Building Authority in no way guarantees the acceptance or the approval of an application, the awarding of a grant, or any other funding commitment from the Massachusetts School Building Authority, or commits the regional school district to filing an application for funding with the Massachusetts School Building Authority.
Can I have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Can I have a motion for the middle school?
Yep. I'll make a motion that, having convened in an open meeting on February 28, 2024, prior to the SOI submission closing date, the school committee of the Triton Regional School District, in accordance with its charter, bylaws, and ordinances, has voted to authorize the superintendent to submit to the Massachusetts School Building Authority the statement of interest form dated March 1st, 2024, for the Triton Regional Middle School located at 112 Elm Street, Byfield, Massachusetts, which describes and explains the following deficiencies and the priority categories for which an application may be submitted to the Massachusetts School Building Authority in the future. 5, replacement, renovation, or modernization of school facility systems such as roofs, windows, boilers, heating and ventilation systems to increase energy conservation and decrease energy-related costs. And 7, replacement of or addition to obsolete buildings in order to provide for a full range of programs consistent with state and approved location requirements. And hereby further specifically acknowledges that by submitting the statement of interest form, the Massachusetts School Building Authority in no way guarantees the acceptance or the approval of an application, the awarding of a grant, or any other funding commitment from the Massachusetts School Building Authority, or commits the regional school district to filing an application for funding with the Massachusetts School Building Authority.
I second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Thank you.
The next item is the FY25 operating budget development. It was expected that this year would be a tough budget year with some of the increases in costs and the continuing flat state and federal funding. Over the last couple of weeks, the committee has heard from our member towns that even with the $970,000 in cuts that were that were prepared coming into the budget season, they would still be unable to support the town's assessments that were proposed. At the meeting last Thursday, the committee asked the superintendent to bring a list of additional reductions, more than $230,000 more to this meeting, and that would drop the total budget increase under the $2.25 million mark, while proposing the least impactful reductions possible in his judgment. I am sure that this was difficult and challenging for the superintendent to do, and I want to thank him for all the work that he's done on the budget. I'm going to now hand this to the superintendent for him to walk us through his recommendations.
Thank you. So you have, again, this was not provided ahead of time. Anyone watching, we will update the budget website tomorrow to have a little quick narrative and an explanation of this document. It is available for those folks in the room. But this was being reviewed and confirmed right up until this afternoon. So again, to reiterate what the chair said, what I heard last week was 2 is the target. Anything you can do that you feel like is reasonable and possible and with as little impact as possible beyond scenario 2, that's great. But would like to then see what it would mean to get to scenario 3, how we would get there. So this document has 2 sides. The first page, I am proposing these reductions to you in the spirit and with the information that we have now through conversations with our towns, through the DCC, and directly with individuals, based on the conversations we've had over the course of the last several weeks now. I'm recommending these changes on the front page. Again, as I had shared last week, the budget continues to ebb and flow throughout the process. You know that when we have talked about an alternative assessment, one of the things we look forward to in an eventual someday alternative assessment is the ability to make more early and often and accurate projections about what the impact will be for towns, because we know that we cannot accurately calculate the assessments to towns until we have state figures on that third Wednesday in January. So there is a benefit on that alternative assessment in the someday world, but something that will forever be the reality is these numbers continue to morph. Regional schools develop budgets very early. Cities and towns are usually starting around this time, and it's a town department or a city department, right, and the budget is finalized, if it's not a town meeting form of government in June. So the reality is things tend and will always change as we go through the process, whether it be the final numbers for our medical and dental insurance or some other shifts that you see here with kindergarten enrollment, for example. So the cuts that I'm going to share with you here, again, I am recommending these changes because I believe we can reasonably make these, and it puts us a little beyond scenario 2. So the first is a reduction of 1 full section of kindergarten at Pine Grove. Again, you remember we have a universal full-day kindergarten now at all 3 elementary schools. We are seeing smaller enrollments for both preschool and kindergarten across the district this year. There may potentially be an additional section there'll probably be a reduced section of preschool at Newbury, which we talked about in the budget, would actually fund that additional 6th grade section so we didn't have class sizes of 25 and 26. There could be additional trimming in preschool. That's obviously supported by a revolving account. So those savings, when we don't have a section, it means we're losing revenue. And so obviously those are more commensurate. We don't charge for kindergarten now. That is fully funded in the general fund budget. So when we don't run a section, that is complete savings directly to the general fund budget. So the cut you see here is a right sizing cut. This is not impacting class sizes. This is not creating larger class sizes in kindergarten. Generally, we run kindergartens at 20 with a full-time assistant in every kindergarten classroom, as well as in every preschool classroom. So this is the reduction of 1 teacher and 1 full-time IA. There's actually a retirement at Pine Grove. It's in special education. There are some other shifts that will happen where it will resolve itself, and those who are remaining will remain in jobs and have a job. So the impact is minimal once things settle. But that savings of 135, 661, not 651, I am proposing that. At the high school, again, as we go through the process in the spring, late winter, enrollments are becoming more and more clear. I'm not listing a department right now because it's not clear, but as we go through the process, there are many changes or many things that impact ultimately the number of sections that are needed in a department. And even within, if we were to say the math department or science department, there are biology, chemistry, physics. There are different licensures. And so when there are shifts, it allows us to make movements. And so there are lots of moving balls and juggling balls in the air. But again, as I noted here, this reduction of a 1.0 FTE will still keep classes largely in the mid to upper teens. It could end up being one full person in a department. It could end up being FTEs from multiple folks or half-time. So that's a work in progress. But again, it's impactful, right? As I noted here, it certainly changes our ability to have flexibility in scheduling, right? The more sections we can offer, the more students have the opportunity to take the classes they want and need to take without having to give up something else. It is the nature of a smaller high school with a high school at 550 students. We don't run multiple sections of every class as you would with a high school of 900, 1,000, 1,200 students. So it is the nature of a smaller high school, and it is something that all of our high schools in the area that are all shrinking talk about and work through different ways of figuring out how to meet that challenge. So this doesn't necessarily create larger class sizes, but it does create some changes in flexibilities and offerings. The dental and insurance, we had talked about the fact, I'm sorry, no, not that one. So this is shifting an additional $35,000 for food services, health and dental insurance from the general fund into the revolving account. Again, we've talked about the fact that we have universal free meals that is generating more revenue. I think it's also creating more needs that we'll talk about in the future. But there is the concept of indirect costs and direct costs. Direct costs are the cost of a salary, and in this case, the cost of health benefits. So moving $35,000 more over into the revolving account, the food services revolving account, that largely creates a share of about 50-50 between the food services revolving account and the general fund budget. 100% of salaries are carried in food services. This gets it to about a 50-50 share. 2 years ago, the general fund was carrying all of the health insurance costs, health and dental insurance costs. So it's a shift, and as we watch the food services program in the years to come, in the participation, I think there will be things that we will be coming to you with Sarah Littman, who's the food services director, to talk about additional needs. She is working on a partnership with the charter school in Newburyport to provide meals, which is a great opportunity. It can be a revenue producer for us. It allows them to participate in the program. We're going to have to talk about a vehicle to transport and all that. So as we look through those options, there may be additional costs. But again, those would only be borne out of that food services revolving account. And if it gets to the point where Sarah's vision is having a program that can provide much more, and it would be generating more revenue, which would obviously change things more. And if there's more of an opportunity to shift those direct costs fully to the revolving, we would be looking to do that. But at this point, it brings the split to roughly 50-50 for benefits. The last two things I believe I mentioned briefly last week or the week prior. The bottom one, the dental insurance, that's a confirmed number. It came in less than what they had told us to assume. And then the second from the bottom, the eliminating student accident insurance, confirming that is because we have duplicate coverage. We left Maya and moved to Fred C. Church as an agent. It was when Michelle Cresta was here, so probably 5 or 6 years ago. And the coverage is more broad with different carriers, Liberty Mutual, some of the names you would expect. And so based on that, with a review that Kyle did before he left with our agent, there is double coverage, so we don't need that standalone policy any longer. So those savings yield $286,754 more. And then at the bottom of the page, you can see the proposed updated operating assessment, which nets an increase to Newbury of $799,842, or 7.13% more than the current year, $751,869, or 5.96% more than the current year for Rowley, and $639,373, or 4.19% more than the current year for Salisbury. Again, we're seeing, even though Newbury's minimums went up the highest, and so they're seeing the largest increase, for every dollar we save, it still saves Newbury, because of their percentage share, it saves Newbury about 29 cents, Salisbury about 39 cents, and Rowley about 32 cents. So that is still the math in the way that those break down. So that is how I would be proposing we adjust the tentative budget, whether that's by formal vote or a vote of intention tonight. I think it's important that when we have the public hearing next week, we've never had a discussion at this point prior to a tentative budget where we're already talking about reductions that we're fairly confident we need to make, so we can talk about how to proceed there. But this is how I would propose getting these cuts that I believe, again, are impactful. I think if you look over the page, the request was to how would we get to scenario 3? If you do the math top to bottom there, you have that same $286,754 from side 1. We have reviewed everything. We have looked at, we keep talking about supplies and materials we've level funded. This will be the 3rd year in a row. There is no trimming. The $75,000 that we're adding to the repair line for this campus, we talked about, could we trim that back a little and rely more on stabilization? It's just not wise. We know we're going to spend it. So as far as numbers that we know we can assume that can be reduced, we are out of areas to be able to do that. Again, we could talk about the 3% COLA that's in there still for anyone who's not in a union or not in an association. But when roughly 85% of our staff is in an association and getting that COLA, that feels really unfair for all the people who are not part of that association, and all the support staff and folks doing a lot of hard work. So as we went through and turned over every stone, there really aren't any ways to nickel and dime our way down to that scenario 3. So the two that are the least impactful, again, least. Again, we're talking about best worst scenario, is the 6th grade teacher at Salisbury. Again, it makes, on paper, class sizes of 19 and 20, right, look not so bad. 19 and 20 is pretty good. Again, we talked last year about that 4th grade cohort, which is the current 5th grade cohort this year, which will be the 6th grade cohort next year. It will be significantly impactful to reduce, to take the 6th grade from 4 sections down to 3. And then the high school assistant principal. Again, we've talked about this. I don't believe it's a wise move. I think it will be deeply impactful across the board. I think students will feel that, staff will feel that, families will feel that. So you'll notice that there is no word proposed on this side of the paper. You see the word potential. It is not being proposed by me to go to side 2, but you have what the impact would be. It takes us slightly above, I forget the exact amount, it's about 4,000 more, or less than. I didn't quite make it to scenario 3. It's within 4,000, but roughly 3,000 or 4,000 of scenario 3. So that is the new information I have to share with you tonight.
Does anybody have any questions for Brian?
With the, just with the kindergarten section, obviously there's room there if there's a few students. We're not aware of any large pockets of students living in Rowley who haven't signed up.
So there are students still on the census that have not signed up. We have done everything we can through the town clerk to get whatever email or phone contact information we can get. There's a mixture of homeschool families that we've not heard from, but we assume, right, the next child will also be homeschooled. But as of right now, there are 35 registrations at Pine Grove School. One of them is a school choice, so that's not a guaranteed spot. We used to accept school choice for kindergarten in March when we were charging tuition for full day K, because we had to understand the financials of establishing sections. It's universal now, so we make those same decisions along with all the other grade levels on the last day of school. So if we don't accept that choice student, we would have 34 in 2 sections, which is 2 sections of 17, which leaves 6 slots before we'd get close to that desired ratio with a 1 full-time teacher and 1 full-time IA. So there is still capacity.
Okay. And then with that high school classroom teacher, that brings us to 4.4 total cuts, 4.4 FT total cuts at the high school. Is that correct? Because we added
1.4 mixed FTEs, 2 individual. We did business, math, history. Yes, this makes 4.4.
So you definitely, we have a lot of classes where we're running 1 section. Are we looking at losing any of those sections with these, like due to low enrollment, or is this basically all? We're consolidating classes that we have 3 or 4 sections down to 2 or 3.
For this one, for the prior 2 in math and business and in history, social studies, those were largely within the department being able to meet the need for the sections with fewer teachers. So it would make some of the core, the fuller core classes a little bit bigger, maybe touching 20, low 20s, but largely across the board, still mid and upper teens. And for this one, there are literally 6, 7, 8 possibilities. And so I can't answer that, but it could be a mix of another section. And I mean, there happens routinely where a teacher says, you know what, I'm willing to go down to a 0.8, or so there's all kinds of different scenarios on the table with how to achieve that. But Patrick is confident he can achieve that. And even in that savings, so that 89,000, there are some potential retirements where we think we already know the solution for the retirement. And so we might be able to carve out a guaranteed $20,000 in savings. So maybe that doesn't become an FTE. That's a known dollar savings to get to that same $90,000 mark. But there's, as you know, working in a high school, right, there's lots of things that change throughout the spring with enrollments.
Right. I think that's my questions on the front side.
Yeah. And I can say too, right, so then the question becomes, wow, we're trimming a lot at the high school and it feels like there's still reasonable class sizes. So the high school has seen the bubbles that came through the elementary. If you look at the total enrollment of the high school and the middle school over the last handful of years, the high school was kind of status quo as far as enrollment, and then it's taken a pretty sharp dive over the last 2-3 years. So a lot of this is right sizing, as I had said early on in the budget process. Some of which would have been done regardless, for sure.
Do you anticipate an influx of school choice students coming in that would affect any of these numbers with reduction of teachers and then offsetting?
So are we talking the high school specifically, or?
Across the board, because we're taking a look at adjusting. Obviously, kindergarten is not going to be that big of a difference if the class enrollment isn't that much, but I'm talking about the high school and then taking a look at this is not proposed, but even just talking about what it would look like in the 6th grade.
So school choice is not required, right? So I will accept school choice. Was that last month? You voted to participate in school choice. There are committees that get involved right down to we have this many seats in this school at this grade level. We've always done it where we watch it throughout the spring and then make that decision on the last day of school, and we accept school choice based on what's available. So we could have, I was talking with a family who had choiced out, has 3 kids in Amesbury and wants to move them back. So that can happen. That's kind of the reverse in that we have 3 more students sitting in a school, but we're also not paying a $15,000 bill to Amesbury. So that we can't control. We generally can accommodate general increases, right? Because you don't get 17 fourth graders at one school coming in for school choice. And so as long as they're coming in and we have the ability to control that and choose where we have spots and availabilities, choice would not impact a decision we make here. I mean, there's an argument, I've had this discussion with Patrick Kelly quite a bit. There's an argument to say we've seen more and more choice interest at the high school level, and there's a value and a risk, right? You accept a student in, you quote unquote own them through graduation. It's a blind process, but there's also, as I mentioned earlier, it's challenging to schedule a smaller high school. So it actually gives you more flexibility, not just from the revenue. So if we brought in 100 students over the course, kind of gradually built up, that's $500,000 coming in, but it also adds another 100 students into the mix that allows you to keep some of those larger sections, and it gives students, I have 2 different bio sections to choose from, not just the 1, or 4 different rather than just the 2. And then we talk about music and the arts, and those are the things that end up suffering because you have to take the graduation requirement classes. But at a 30,000-foot level, no, I'll make decisions about choice based on where we land. Yeah.
Can I ask an odd question? Intra-district, so not students choicing in from out of district, but every time. Sorry. Students going between the schools within our district, is that going to harm the possibility if you have students? And I will point out, like a 6th grade student at Salisbury Elementary looking at this may want to go to Newbury or Rowley.
So there's no guarantee.
There's no
So
guarantee.
similar, we treat intra and inter between towns, intra within the Triton schools, the same. So by policy for us, we give preference. We consider all the applications at that moment, right? So it's if you applied on January 1st, so Nicole receives the applications. So if Nicole has applications that are received from January through June 13th, 14th, last day of school is Friday the 14th now, because we had a really dangerous snowstorm. I had to call a snow day. So when we send that out, someone could literally apply on June 12th, and in the applications, they have just as much of a chance as someone who applied in January 1st, because it's blind and it's not first come serve, it's lottery if we need that. So we take intra-district first, then we look at siblings of intra, and then we go to siblings of inter, and then brand new applicants last. So we give them preference, but it's still not a guarantee. If there isn't space, there isn't space.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have a question? Brian, I have a question on the reduction of the additional high school teacher. This may be a single full-time person or FTEs from 2 or more individuals. If you did the 2 or more individuals and made them less FTEs, is it possible you could possibly lose those 2 teachers in addition to?
Yes. So it would be, that is not the first preference, right? I'll say that, right? That is not the ideal solution. However, if there is a discipline that needs to be taught and we only need 3 sections and someone is full-time, we can't keep the person full-time and have two full sections of them not being able to teach anything else. I think more and more we've had lots of discussions about aligned schedules at the middle school and the high school, and also dual licensure. So someone that might be able to teach, and I'm not saying we're going to sciences, but I'm licensed in bio and chemistry. That allows more opportunity for someone to take on two roles and teach a broader full schedule. So it would be not ideal, possible, but it would be based on need.
Okay. Does anybody have anything else?
Tagging on that, would you send out, like into a department, hey, is there anybody looking to move to a 0.8 or a 0.6?
So we do that by design anyway, that we always ask early on, if anyone is interested in moving anywhere, right, within your licensure, please let us know, right, because everyone knows we're making the decisions on any given year. In a year like this, there's going to be more movement when we have a retirement in another department and need to move people around, whether it be high school or elementary. So we do that by design anyway, but yes, I know at the high school specifically, there's already been lots of discussions within each of the departments for sure.
Anybody else?
I have one question.
Oh, go ahead,
Is
Paul.
there any concern about any long-term risk that we take moving the 35,000 to the revolving fund? Is that, I mean, seems like it's pretty steady with the universal free lunches. That seems fairly popular across the state. But is there any other risk that comes from that?
I would say no, because that could be shifted back, right? We're next week, I think, right? Didn't we decide on? So PNN is meeting next Wednesday before our meeting to go over. We've been negotiating with the cafeteria workers. There is a steady, healthy revenue stream, like I said, especially through universal free meals, and then enter Sarah Littman into the equation and the creativity and interest in building the program. We're very confident. So walking out the door, as Kyle was going through the numbers, there's still capacity. Even modeling out, adding, I was talking about additional positions and talking about, providing schools for the charter or meals for the charter schools. With all that modeled out, there's still flexibility, not extra funds, right? It'll be used, but there's still capacity, assuming reasonable continued participation. Numbers are up, period. I mean, definitely when meals are free, they're serving significantly more. Breakfast, second chance breakfast, if you come here, about 8:45-ish. The carts are out. After first period, they can grab another. It's a reimbursable breakfast. Kids can just grab and go. So all of those programs generate money to support good food programming. Yeah.
As we look at this paper, on the front side is what Brian has proposed, and on the back side are things that he's not proposing. And I agree with that, because Salisbury Elementary needs to have that classroom teacher in the 6th grade, and the high school does need the assistant principal. We came out of a pandemic, and, the kids were struggling, and they've been struggling. And just this past year, I've seen the needle moving in the right direction in all 5 of our schools. And taking away any of these resources, I think, will be detrimental to our students. So I agree with what you have here for cuts, even though we don't like them. It is what is in the best interest of the schools in our 3 towns. I don't know if anybody else has any.
I agree that the page 1 is necessary and doable. I look over at page 2, and I'll say it again, I've been saying it the whole time. Salisbury Elementary is going through huge changes right now in staffing. They are, by and large, one of our more vulnerable schools as a whole, and that cohort is extremely vulnerable academically, socially, emotionally. they don't deserve this cut because they've worked hard. That staff, the administrators, the students have worked hard to build back some of what they've lost, and they deserve to keep going in a positive direction. And losing an educator, their 6th grade year, right before we send them off to the middle school, it's not only hurting them, but it's also hurting the middle school. And I think that the $96,000 savings that we see here, we're going to lose in IEPs, 504s, behavioral, and possibly out of district. I can speak to Salisbury. Some of our students are really on the cusp of not being able to be within these classrooms the way they are now, by no fault of their own. It's just the way that the cards were dealt. We put them in 6th grade to send them off to middle school, and we're handing that problem off to the middle school, causing a larger problem to a wider population. So I don't think it'll be a $96,000 savings. I think very short term, it will be a huge spend. And that's my greatest concern, that we're setting ourselves up for failure, not far down the road, but very soon down the road. And as far as the high school goes, I agree with Linda. They're also a vulnerable population that are coming out of a pandemic, trying to right the ship and get ready to go off into whatever their next phase is. And they have social and emotional needs that cannot be met by just one high school assistant principal. It's not feasible, and we could end up losing staff or losing students to go to other high schools and therefore not saving $91,000. I just don't think these are savings in the short term or the long term. I think they're going to lead to a greater cost and more problems for our students and our families and our towns. And that's my greatest concern, is that we save this money right now on this paper, and then next year we need double or triple that, and we've already lost so much. It's a huge concern.
Anybody else?
Can I just say, I don't think, not to suggest it changes anyone's opinion, nor am I suggesting it should, but just to clarify that because I don't think I said it out loud, with the reduction of the assistant principal, it includes an offset of a cost, so it's salary and benefits, and it includes the increase of a hall monitor at an hourly rate. So just to make sure that that was clear, doesn't solve the problem. Again, I'm not suggesting it does. I just wanted to make sure in the numbers that was included, so I just wanted to point that out because I don't think I said that out loud.
And although I appreciate adding a hall monitor, it's not the same as having that assistant principal.
Not even close.
Right.
I just want to make the statement that, to make sure that if anybody's watching for the first time, that this is not just $286,000 worth of cuts. It's also including $962,000. So it's a little under $1.3 million that's being cut from the budget. So I want to make sure that if anybody's like checking in for the first time, that this is a significant change that we're looking at making here, and this is not a level services funded budget by any means, and it's definitely going to impact all 5 of our schools.
So I don't know if we want to take a vote on this, that this is possibly as low as we want to go, or because we definitely don't want to go to scenario 3.
Do we need to take a vote right now, or can we wait until the public hearing next
I'm just saying to take a vote
week?
that we're not going to scenario 3, that this is where we want to direct Brian as, so that he can put out to the public for the public hearing next week that these are the.
So I'll make a motion to keep the blue side and eliminate the red.
Before we do, may I just make a quick comment?
Oh, yes, and I think Narissa did too.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to second that my concern was less about more about giving Brian very solid direction on the documentation he should be preparing for the hearing, much less than this is the number we don't want to go below. I think our outlook right now is toward the public hearing next week, and that's what we need to give him direction for today.
I just want to say, first of all, I think you've done a great job with this, and it's not, far from, I guess, some of the worst imaginations I've had, and I've had a lot of imaginations. I can't tell you the time I've spent thinking about this, and I just want to say before we get into any vote, I always struggle when I find myself disagreeing with the people here because I respect you all so greatly, and I know you're putting the same thought into these things as I am. I guess when I look at this, I've said, you all know where I stand on things. I've said it. I've said it plenty. I guess what keeps continuing to happen across the towns is that we worry about the lack of support. We worry about not being able to get the votes. We worry about people not supporting this. The worry never goes the other way. The worry never goes, is it going to go too far if we can go too far in one direction, we can go too far in another. The reason that doesn't happen is because it generally seems to be that the people who don't want things, it's very easy to vote against something. When you do want something, you get, something like this where I've heard people say, and pragmatically you've made good arguments, it may be the best that we can get, but people who do want something tend to vote for it because it's the best that we can get and they want to move things forward. But there has to be a bridge that's too far, and I think what we've been asked by the towns, especially the way we've been asked at the last second, is a bridge too far for me. I think that there are people who do feel the way I feel. I feel like they're not going to be heard because of the way in which it happened. And I look at things like this, and like I said, I think you've done a spectacular job. These are as minimally impactful as they could be. I sat with students trying to put together a high school schedule. I've developed a high school schedule for departments. I understand the importance of that flexibility and offering new sections and things like that. That impacts a student's track through Triton. It impacts their ability to direct their own education, direct their own learning. I see that, and this is after, as Erin pointed out, those other things. And so, while I appreciate the very pragmatic arguments that many of you have made, and concur that they may well be right, it's just it's gone past the point of what I can get behind, I guess. I'm not saying that in an attempt to influence anyone or change anybody's mind. It's simply, if we're going to be taking a vote, I feel that it's important that we state where we're at on that.
I have a lot of respect for what you just said, Paul, and I think all of us, this is hard for all of us because we want what's best for our students, especially coming out of a pandemic. These are the kids that they're sending off into the world. But I have respect for what Brian does, and to me, if Brian came back to say that each and every one of these was going to be impactful to our students more than they are, and that he couldn't stand behind them, I think you would see a lot more of us balking at these, because we hire Brian to be the educational expert to come to us to give us the recommendations. And if Brian's coming to us with these reductions, although I know he doesn't like them, but they're the least impactful that he can give to us, I will stand behind what he's saying every time. Going into future years, he may be coming to us to say that we can't go lower than this. And we'll have to express to the towns that this is the budget that we have to put forth. Again, I mean, we're here to discuss whatever anyone wants to discuss. You have a right to your opinions, and I have no problem with anyone's opinions. That's what we're here for, to show the public that we're fighting for the education of our students, but also trying to be mindful of the three towns. And I think in this budget that Brian has asked does exactly that.
And I should say, I agree with that. I don't feel that the three towns are being mindful of us.
So I guess what I'm just saying is Brian has to put out for the public hearing so that the public understands what the cuts include and what the budget will put forth. So that was the reason that I asked for a vote, so that he knows exactly the number that we're going to put forth.
I was going to say, I don't think there's precedence for this, right? Because we've never made an adjustment. So I don't think it makes sense to adjust the tentative budget.
No.
But I think if in my communication, I think what would be helpful for everyone to hear is the tentative budget that was approved on February 13th, right? 13th, is included. Please take a look at it. It includes $962,000 worth of cuts. Additionally, at the February 28th meeting, the committee voted to identify additional reductions to that budget, yet to be finalized in the final budget on March 13th. The public hearing is an opportunity for you to come and express your thoughts, and you have the two documents that outline the reductions from current level services. I think that would be helpful, however you want to vote that. Not that you're adjusting the tentative budget, but just that you voted to take a step toward that, and it will be finalized in the final budget.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm not ready to make a motion yet, but had to say something first. I just wanted to say that I also appreciate the time and work that went into this. I mean, when you're finding $5,707, we know that
That went to Kyle on his way up.
Yeah, well, okay, Kyle, but you sifted through literally every single line in that budget to find that last $7 there. But I just wanted to say, I think, you know, when we're looking at numbers, I'm looking at two things. I'm looking at those two in the red on the last page, and I can't get to the point of saying that either of those could possibly be okay either, for all the reasons stated, and particularly for the high school principal with the chronic absenteeism, because that is such a, I mean, even the students are so aware of it, seeing it highlighted in things like The Voice over and over again, talking about student absenteeism and the concerns with it. That's a very real thing that needs to be addressed, especially at the high school level. But I also don't, the other thing that comes to mind then is, would you, knowing that this is kind of the next step on the rung, is there anything, I would say swap out something that's already on the cut list and put one of these in there instead. And I don't think there's anything on that list that I would say something should be swapped here. I never want to, you know, ding the students and the staff and our families, you know, more than we have to. I think, you know, we've listened pretty carefully, getting ongoing information even into the last days, about kind of where the different towns are at. I understand and I hear what you're saying, Paul, but I'm just looking at our options here, and I don't unfortunately believe that we can push now and sacrifice what we're going to need in the next few years, because pushing now sets things in motion, I think, where we have a building that's aging. We have a couple of tough budget years ahead of us. And I don't believe we can try to force things at this point. The committee has that authority, has that ability to be able to do something like that. I don't think we can afford to do that at this point, because I think it would be a short-term gain for long-term pain. So that would be why I think that bringing it down to the 41,296, that's at the bottom of the updated page 1, is the number that we should direct the superintendent to prepare the communication about the public hearing to.
Anybody else?
Already thought that our tentative budget had cuts that are extremely impactful on our students. I think that some of these cuts here that we see on the blue side, they're cuts that mostly are not going to have a major impact on our students. Certainly, kindergarten classes of 17 is what our students experience, and so losing that kindergarten section is not going to be impactful, and shifting the money around makes sense. But I can't take a vote tonight to recommend changing. I can't take a vote tonight recommending a lower number than our tentative budget. I think we already made impactful cuts to get there, so that's where I am.
So Paul, are you proposing the shifts in the kindergarten are okay, but the high school you would want?
No, I'm just saying that I don't feel like I can take a vote on a different number to be presented tonight. That's all.
I'll make a motion for the committee to direct the superintendent to prepare the public hearing budget documents to be distributed to the community to reflect the number at the bottom of page 1 of $41,296,953. Is that?
I think so. Again, I don't think there's a template for this, because I think it's important that you're not adjusting the tentative budget, right? But that, if you're directing me to share that as additional likely cuts, I can certainly wordsmith that and share that with you, Linda and Narissa, as the chair and vice chair, to make sure it's reflective of what you believe the committee shared with me tonight. But I think that does it.
Can I have a second?
Before I second, do we need to vote on this, or can we just say to Brian that he can make the presentation?
We don't need to vote, but it's something that I want to get consensus of the committee, that you're agreeing that this is the number that these are the cuts he's putting out for the public hearing.
I think it's important for anyone attending the public hearing to know where you currently stand, for them to give you feedback and information on.
Unless we give them what we're cutting, they're not going to know whether to come to the public hearing to have a discussion on.
And I will.
So given the fact that sometimes these shift around, I would prefer to get a consensus than vote on this is what we're cutting, or what we're proposing is the cuts that Brian is putting forth. I know every once in a while, highly unlikely this year, but every once in a while we find something where you shift something else because new information comes in, and I don't want to be tied to these specific items if he identifies something different.
We have to put these out for public hearing for next week.
Okay.
Because we have to do a posting on Friday, so we have to put it out there as to what the cuts are. Things could, because we have a tentative budget, and then we don't vote the final one till the 13th, but we have to put something out so we need to have a consensus for Brian to be able to do that.
And I just will say, right, the final vote is 2 weeks from tonight. We get an extra day in February tomorrow, and then it's March on Friday. So there is, aside, right, from kindergarten, early childhood registrations, that's really the only thing in flux. We could get new registrations, enrollments. We're not going to know that in the next 2 weeks. So I think we're not going to learn anything new in the next week, where next Wednesday, after you hear on the public hearing, you're going to have to give me final guidance so that I can produce a document and give it back to you 1 week later, and that's the deadline to vote and submit it to the towns. So it's really a week, and I really don't think there's much else. Like, we have all our renewals, we have, we've made assumptions, you know, we keep talking about special education costs. There's potentially some good news and potentially some bad news, but we've spent all our reserves down to the bone. So I really don't, unless we're talking about, the thing I was mathing is, obviously, Paul, you've spoken consistently about the STEM and the SEL teacher. Unless you wanted to start talking about some of the trades on the blue page for some of the positions included in that 962,000, I think that's really the only thing that you'd be able to do, unless you're saying, Brian, find another way to cut 100,000 or something. But I don't think there's going to be any other movements that would yield a decision, a change in my decision about what I'm proposing to you there.
And sorry, do you mind if I, real quick? I was just going to say that the traditional thing that I think a vote is a good thing for is that traditionally the committee would vote the tentative budget, and then that's what the superintendent would send out. If we want him to send out something different, that's what we're directing him to do, and that's why I phrased the vote in that way, is to not have it exclusively be the tentative budget like we traditionally do, but to have it be something beyond that.
So just my recollection of what we've done in the past is we've voted the tentative budget, and then we've talked about some other options on cuts, and we would give you feedback on whether or not we felt that there was something we wanted swapped, or...
It's in recent years, it's been pretty rare to change between the tentative and the final budget. Changes have largely been, we get medical confirmed and we save $100,000, and so the tentative comes down that way. We have not had a list of cuts between the tentative and the final for quite some time. And usually tonight would have been the public hearing, and then you wouldn't have had anything tonight. You would have been listening. Next week, you would have come back, and we would be having this discussion, and you would say, yes, here's the final guidance. We're going to vote it next week. The only change here is that we're making decisions, and again, not confirming, because you could still change the way that Narissa formed the vote, the way I heard it. I'm sure she got it. It's largely, this is new information, and we believe we need to do this. You're not voting a final budget tonight, so you still could come back and change your mind. The vote, the only thing we submit to the towns is the tentative budget and the final budget. This is you making a motion to say, we believe we need to do this as of February 28th at 8:01 p.m. so that I can communicate that with families. So they're clear, it's not, as you pointed out, not just the 962, but an additional $286,000 in reductions.
In the past, we've had the principals come in, give to us what they felt they needed. So sometimes we would say, because of what the principal said, we believe you should add this back in. And those were the type of discussions we have. This year, there really hasn't been any discussions because Brian came into the budget already cutting it $960,000. And then hearing from the towns, we were trying to come to a middle ground with the least impact for our students. And like I said, we have to direct him for the public meeting next week, and it's going to be less than the tentative budget that we have already voted on with these cuts. So that's what the vote was for, just for him to say, we're agreeing to this for this public comment. Hearing from the public comment, things may change. We have a discussion after the public hearing to discuss what was said at the public hearing. You know what I mean? So this isn't a final vote. Go ahead, Susanna.
Just for clarification then, so all of these listed back from February 7th, the proposed cuts, as well as these additional cuts tonight, these are all going to be shared with the public, correct? All of them?
So you said February 7th?
Yeah.
Oh,
the
so it's.
first one.
Yes, it's actually in the budget document. So it's now in the tentative budget that you approved on the 13th. It's pages 2 and 3. It's on pages 2 and 3 of the budget. So I'll be sharing, right, so the tentative budget's posted by law, we have to do that. So my message would be, on behalf of the committee, is the tentative budget as approved, and then further discussion on the evening of the 28th. The reductions included on page 2 and 3, as well as the separate document, it will be a single page, it will not have a back page, reflect what the committee believes they will need to cut to approve a budget. The final budget won't be approved until the 13th. We encourage you to come next week on the 6th to share your thoughts.
And in addition to that, are you going to start with what the level service number was and then all the cuts so that people know that this isn't a level service budget?
I can. I will draft and share with you. I feel like the more, rather than pointing out people to say, this is, I can give you the number, 1.2, $3 million below level services. To not put it in the body of the message because people glaze over.
Right.
Versus saying there's 2 documents attached. One is the full tentative budget. Please look on pages 2 and 3. There's $962,000, whatever the number is, $192 worth of reductions. In addition, there's a second document that shows another $286,000 worth of reductions. All of those are reduced from a current level services budget. So rather than itemizing all the cuts in the message, but yes, it will make it very clear. Yeah.
Go ahead, Caitlin.
Can I just,
You need to.
you just said rather than itemizing all the numbers, could you just itemize all the titles of all the cuts? I know you're against bullet points. I've seen from all your messages, you don't use them.
I'm a big fan of bullet points at times,
Yeah, I wasn't going to say that.
only on Saturdays.
I think from my discussion with community members, is there not, however reason, whatever the reason may be, they're not opening the document and they're not looking at this, but I want to make it fully transparent. Even, I know you say they'll glaze over the numbers because clearly they will. And but if you could somehow highlight at least the school and the position or just the cut, and really put it out there that this is what $1.2 million in cuts looks like in a list.
I think the location
Just the location and the title.
it definitely needs to be in there.
And I know that's an awkward thing to say, and I've never asked you to how to, but
Proceed. No, I think that's a great idea.
I just,
Yeah.
that's my feedback I'm getting. They're like, where did I find this? Or what? I'm like, open the rest of the email. But I want to, I know, Mr. Skeeter could disagree, but.
Absolutely.
I just was following up from last week as well. We talked about, so we have the public comment next week, and then last week's meeting you had asked to go to the towns to present these budgets. So have we got those dates as well?
I've received from Salisbury. I have not received anything from Rowley, and Newbury has decided that they didn't want us to come. They want us to vote the budget that we feel.
So I listened to the Newbury meeting a few weeks ago, and there was a lot of inaccurate information about conversations we had at the DCC meeting that was being presented there. So that is pretty foolish.
So I know at Rowley's select board meeting, they did say that they wanted us to come, but I have not heard from anybody from Rowley as of yet.
Just right before this meeting, there is an email that you're now included on. I was messaged shortly before I replied with you included, so.
I stand corrected.
She has not seen a message yet. There is a communication that was delivered literally moments before this meeting.
Between the 6 o'clock when I left my house and the 7 o'clock that I started
Linda.
this meeting, I did not see that. So Rowley has, so evidently Rowley has. So I've had discussions with Alicia, and she just feels the school needs to vote what they feel they need. And that is what we're going to do. And that's what we're doing here tonight. So being transparent, we're going to go to the towns to explain what these cuts mean, where we started and how we got there. So does anybody else have any other questions on the budget?
Can I make two quick things? I think one of the things, just to make clear so that we're saying it here too, is that this is not a, us against them sort of situation in going to the towns. This is purely educational. It's not meant to be in our discussions. It's not meant to be a discussion. It's meant to be a true presentation, just so there is an understanding of what the numbers mean, because that's important, because
There's misinformation out there.
there is misinformation out there, and there's also dollars, and there's a value that comes with dollars. And when you change dollars, that value is either going to be embellished or sacrificed. So, in that those limits and those numbers get us to this point. People just need to have an understanding, right, of what that means. The other thing I wanted to say, though, is that I have a pretty major concern about just bullet pointing these in the email with a school in a position, just because I think it loses the nuance that Brian gave it as far as, so for instance, if it just said one kindergarten teacher and one IA at Pine Grove School, people aren't understanding that that's being decreased because there aren't that many students. They're going to understand, right? Their mentality is 3 sections or even sometimes 4 sections, because that's what Pine Grove's had. So they're going to hear large class sizes if all it says is one reduction of one kindergarten teacher and one kindergarten IA at Pine Grove School. So I think there needs to be more than that if it's going to be in the body of the email. In the body of the email is fine. I just think there needs to be more than a position in a school, because otherwise I think it's going to lead to a lot of misunderstandings.
So then what about this chart? By putting the chart, like either the chart in there or make them into bullet points where you have the explanation on what the cut is and why. And I agree, because once they open up a financial
message that
document,
Caitlin
if you
says I
don't
read all the
understand
time,
what you're
it's too
looking
long.
at in the financial document, they're going to get lost and then they're going past page 2. So
So I have a comment. So if you want to get the public involved in reading this and getting on board, just cut an assistant football coach, okay, and say that the cuts involve sports programs, and you will get responses. Problem fixed.
And again, I think the committee has worked hard with our 3 towns with the DCC to try and have a better relationship and trying to express what our needs are and understanding what their needs are. And we have to come to a middle ground, because I know you guys don't like to hear it, but it takes a village to do everything that we have to do between the towns and the schools. And our students in our schools are residents of our towns. So we have to make sure that we're including them as well.
I completely agree with you, and I really appreciate what has been set up and established before I even came on board with the communication in the DCC meetings and the open conversation. I just hope that that carries further, that when we offer to come and explain publicly at one of their meetings what this looks like, and to be able to converse back and forth with them and answer questions to make sure that the information is accurate that's being put out there, as opposed to someone's interpretation and only repeating the facts that we had to correct at the DCC meeting as the facts that are going to the rest of their boards. So I find it completely unfortunate that that's the message that is coming across in that meeting, when it's not what we were hoping they were leaving the door with. And I was really hope that they would utilize us as public servants, as part of, the community, to be able to help support the conversation at the town meetings.
Well, the discussion that I had with Alicia was the school committee is tasked with a job and the select board is tasked with a job. So she was saying that the school committee has to do what we were tasked to do. So she didn't feel going there to explain it. What we did tonight, going to the school, to select board, we would still have this discussion that we had tonight, and tasking Brian to send out the public hearing information. So even though we're going to the towns, we're still doing the job that we were elected to do, And I will always put as much information at the DCC meetings. If the towns want us to come and do a presentation, we can do it future years as well, to build that relationship with our towns, that it should not be us against them. The main goal is to educate our students in the best way that all of us can. So, can I have a motion? Oh, you already gave the motion. Oh, Matt, sorry.
I don't know if I should talk, but, yeah, I know. If Newbury's telling us to do what we need to do, then my decision might be a little different when we go to a final budget.
No, well, they're just saying that what Brian has come with, the proposal that he has come with, and that's the way, because they wanted, Rowley and Newbury wanted us to come to scenario 3. Brian, as well as the school committee, doesn't feel scenario 3, it's going to be too impactful. So they're saying if we're going to vote for scenario 2, then we are to vote for scenario 2. So that's what it was. It wasn't just vote whatever you want, let's go above the green box.
It almost sounds like they don't want to hear about the cuts, though.
No, I don't think that's fair. I think they understand what the cuts are. They were just, as with Rowley, is they were seeing if we could come somewhere in the middle between the 3 and the 10 and the one that we voted. That was my impression.
Okay.
I was going to say, I read it as more about process, because at the end of the day, they did submit a letter to you that says they vote for or support, whatever the right term was there, scenario 3. So I hear what you're saying, and I understand that reaction, but I do think it was more about process, about how information and roles are accomplished, rather than what could potentially happen on the other side of that. My read.
Which the 3 towns could come with a letter saying what, don't go over that. But we as a school committee have to look at what the school needs. So we take into account what the 3 towns say, but we also have our job that we can't go below this because it's going to be way too impactful to our students. We don't need a Taj Mahal type education here, as much as we'd love it, we understand, but there has to be some number that we say that is too impactful to go lower than that number. So it's just a matter of trying to balance what we were elected to do, if that makes sense. That's my opinion. So we have a motion on the table which allows Brian to put together a public hearing packet to hear from the community next Wednesday. Does anybody have any?
I'll second.
Yeah. Any discussion? All those in favor? All those opposed? We have a school committee public hearing and then a discussion scheduled for next Wednesday, March 6th at 7 PM here in the high school library. Can I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor? I want to thank you, everybody, for being here and at home. Have a nice evening.